So thanks for coming. Today is just really a chance to sort of think about little tips and tricks on how to do science, and basically everybody is always an early career researcher. You never grow out of that because we're all just sort of finding our way really. I think if you ever lose that, it's time to stop. If you become jaded, just stop. So some tips like this. So this is just an idea that struck me. The first thing is just relax. Just accept the messiness of what we do as science. So scientific reality is messy. There aren't clear-cut answers for these things. As Richard Feynman said, scientific knowledge is a body of statements of varying degrees of certainty, some most unsure, some nearly sure, and none absolutely certain. So once you kind of just accept it's a messy business, there's no clean-cut answers, you can just relax and enjoy it. And then Tom Schofield, he sadly died very young in a coach crash in Colombia on holiday. He was just sort of young, late 20s, I think, neuroscientist who just done his PhD and was doing a postdoc in America. He did his PhD at UCL here. He decided to go on holiday to Colombia. Coach for the time he died. So it's better to be on the beach in Brighton tomorrow. A little bit safer. And he said, science is not about finding the truth at all, but about finding better ways of being wrong. The best scientific theory is not the one that reveals the truth. That is impossible. It is the one that explains what we already know about the world in the simplest way possible, and that makes useful predictions about the future. And this comes from his posthumous essay in Nature magazine. Has anyone read that? 2013. It was, I guess they must have been cleaning out his hard drive or something. They found it and someone sort of re-edited it for Nature. But basically he talks about the levels that you go through. You start out thinking professors are knowledgeable and so forth, and then you realize, well, they don't actually really know that much, and then you realize you don't know that much, and then you end up in this sort of Zen-like state. It's just about finding better ways of being wrong. So another tip is that the test of time is the ultimate test of scientific validity. So don't worry about being a slick salesperson for your findings, because it won't alter how they pan out, because you'll be dead by then. Just, again, comes back to that sort of, just relax and just enjoy it. For example, has anyone heard of Bill Hamilton?
Yes.
So he was the sort of greatest biologist in Darwin, really. And he was sort of 6'4", kind of looked like a wild man from the hills, with massive shaggy hair. He basically was very quiet and a very shy guy. So he was this sort of big, tough guy, but very quiet. And his lecturing style, well, my PhD supervisor for the course went to one of his lectures, and he would sort of, for example, be presenting a graph, and then he would sort of notice a beautiful data point on the graph and just sort of get lost in the beauty of it. So he'd just stand there for 10 minutes without speaking. So I tried that now. 10 minutes is a long time if it's a lecture, right? That's not good salesmanship. You should be some kind of fast-talking, smartly dressed, estate agent type guy, right? No, it doesn't matter, because Hamilton was the antithesis of a salesman. He really was just the most quiet, shy, non-smart, non-glamorous guy. And yet his findings still shone through. So he was the guy briefly to explain. He was the guy who explained how altruism can evolve by natural selection of selfish gene, which Richard Dawkins then sort of popularized. But he was the sort of, well, he was the genius behind this. He also showed why animals herd, because nobody knew why do animals form herds, right? It's weird. They thought it was some sort of group selection, self-census behavior. No, he showed animals herd because it's a form of selfish cover-seeking. So imagine if you're an antelope in the plains of North America or Africa or something like that, and you're on your own, and there's a predator. What's your odds of being targeted? It's something like 100%, right? Because it's one of you. So if you just stand next to another antelope, that cuts the odds 50%, just the act of standing next to one. So imagine if there's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and so on and so forth. So he showed this mathematically, and never did he sell his findings. He never had a course on how to present your findings, or this kind of marketing kind of talent. And yet he's revered as well, the greatest biologist since Darwin, and well worth reading. Has anyone heard of Narrow Roads of Geneland? Okay, so it's a 3-part sort of autobiography. Basically, his papers were collected from the phases of his life, and then he wrote notes about what he was thinking when he was writing them. And it's like a window into the mind of a genius. It just makes you realize how dumb you are. We probably all think we're moderately clever. We're not. Just read Narrow Roads of Geneland, and you'll see just how pedestrian one's thought processes are. And so the first volume is the one that's worth reading, because he wrote each chapter intro. So every chapter has an intro that he wrote personally. The second volume, he died by then. So he basically, to cut a long story short, he was this big, strong, 6'4" ox of a man who he got it into his head that HIV had happened because of drug companies in the US testing out polio vaccines in the 50s in Africa. So he thought he wanted to go to Africa and look for evidence of this. And everybody told him, don't go. Because he was 60 something by then. It's a very tough area. There's a lot of risks involved, but he went anyway. He became very ill, had some sort of internal bleeding, and was rushed back to England in a air ambulance sort of type situation. He died. He didn't recover. They still don't know what killed him. Something terrible. Anyhow, he's the ultimate example of why you don't have to worry about being a salesperson. Just do your stuff, publish it, and let it sell itself. Because if it's good, it will. If it isn't, it won't. Simple. Tip number 3, there is no end point in science. So it doesn't matter if you work 18 hours a day or 18 hours a week. It won't make any difference. It's not like the Olympics where you get to the finish line, you get that gold medal. There is no finish line. It just keeps rolling forever. So whatever suits your biology, just do it. In my case, it's about an hour a week, maybe 2. But just learn yourself. Learn how you function. You've probably already learned this a bit from your time as a bachelor student or as a PhD, but you never stop learning. You just sort of fine-tune your way of operating. Like, has anyone been to Down House? Charles Darwin's house, Down House? So he lived quite close to here near Bromley, in the country, and he basically set up this big house in the country as a sort of support system for his working style. So he had this very particular style of working. He only did about 2 hours of work a day, and he would sort of get up quite early, do a quick bit of work, then he'd go for a walk, then he'd have breakfast, then he'd read letters and whatever his letters read to him, then he'd do a bit more work, and then he was basically done by lunchtime, pretty much. So he just this part of Darwin's secret of success was that he kind of learned how he worked, and then he optimized that. And he was super rich, so he didn't have to work for a living, so he could afford to optimize his working environment for what suited him, which was about 2 hours of work a day. And he still published something like 22 books, as well as papers. So just writing one book almost killed me. And I had a word processor. So I hate to think writing 22 books in pencil or longhand on paper. It's not easy. Tip number 4, worthwhile effects shine through. Okay? So it's just, they make themselves known. You don't really have to worry too much about faffing around, being finicky. If what you're doing is worthwhile, it will just bust down the door and announce itself. Here I am, here's the finding. Robust, repeatable findings are unaffected by nitpicking. So say you've got 100 studies looking at IQ and job performance, and you find that, lo and behold, IQ predicts job performance. If someone comes along and nitpicks and says, oh, well, actually, your measure of job performance is often suboptimal, it doesn't matter. The robust effects will shine through it. The nitpicking doesn't take anything away from that. The person would have to actually find counter evidence. They'd have to go and do another 100 studies proving that IQ doesn't affect job performance. And good luck for that if you do that. Crash test your hypotheses. So if it's a real effect, you can crash test it. Okay? Has anyone been in the army or anything here? Yeah, so the way the army, a good analogy is the difference between professional shooters and amateur shooters, like target shooters, right? Has anyone done target shooting? Yeah, so target shooters are very finicky. They clean their rifle for hours after shooting. They use specially hand-loaded ammunition. They keep their rifle in a sort of big, padded airline case type thing. The Army's the opposite. If the Army's testing a gun, they want to make it fail. They want to do everything they can to make it fail. So they cover it in mud, they chuck it out of a helicopter, they shoot 20,000 rounds without actually cleaning the thing. And if the gun still fires, it's a worthwhile gun. It's the total opposite to the amateur shooter. So if you want to be a professional scientist, like a professional soldier, you want to crash test your stuff. Try and make it fail. Put everything in the way of your hypotheses that just will make them fail. And if they still shine through and they still come out as supported by your data, it's probably a real effect. That's kind of related to the idea of a non-fragile effect. So the law of fragile effects is sort of something Jeffrey Gray would go on about. Have you heard of Jeffrey Gray? Yeah, so he was a great man who was the head of department of psychology until '99, and he would talk about the fragile effects. So imagine you're doing a test of working memory, right, or some just ordinary lab task, and you do it and you get a great effect. So if you have Mozart playing in the background, right, it improves your working memory, something like that. Now you rerun the study, but you make the person wear a clown hat. So they literally have a clown hat on their head, and they do exactly the same thing, and it destroys the effect. That means it's fragile. It's not a real effect. So if your effects are so finicky that they can be destroyed by some minor change to your experimental paradigm, in a sort of jokey case like making the person wear a clown hat, it's a waste of time. It's not a real effect. Real effects, you can turn them on and off. So if it's a real effect, it's on, off, on, off, on, off, on, off, and it will keep shining through. Like, I was doing some shooting. One of my hobbies is shooting, so I was doing some shooting at Bisley, and I had a new telescopic sight on my rifle. And I was taking it on and off. I was shooting it and taking it off and putting it back on again and shooting. And the guy next to me, we couldn't believe what he was saying. He was like, "What are you doing? You're destroying the accuracy of your gun." And I said, "No, because a worthwhile sighting system is a robust and replicable sighting system." And so every time I put it back on, it just came back to zero. So I knew, therefore, that it was a good telescopic site. And that's how I test my sites. And this is completely the opposite to what a sort of amateur would do. You know, they would just get their telescopic site and then they would just baby it and leave it, wouldn't mess with it at all. If the result is replicated by a different research team, that's a real effect, most likely. So have you ever done a replication of your own studies, right? Anyone done a replication of their own studies? One or two people. Have other research teams ever done a replication of your studies? It's quite rare, because people are naturally egotistical. They're interested in their own studies. They don't really want to replicate open studies. But if it's done by a team, like I had a study looking at the anxious facial expression. So you know that facial expression which Homer Simpson does when Marge catches him up to no good. He does that kind of, you know, Homer, what are you doing? Nothing. And his eyes sort of, that's the anxious facial expression. But this is not actually in the literature. So I just did a study where we just got a bunch of volunteers, we just videoed them while they were responding to a scenario. So they'd have a scenario like, you failed your exams. So they would just go, or you're meeting up with your friends, so they'd be all happy. And then one of the scenarios was an anxious type scenario where you're kind of on your own, at home, late at night, and you hear a funny noise downstairs. You don't know what it could be. It could be a squirrel knocking over a milk bottle. Or it could be a psychopathic prowler who wants to insert things into your body. You just don't know. It could be anything. So the facial expression they did for that was again this sort of, you know, what's that? Can you hear something? And you just don't know what it is. So you're risk assessing, and this is exactly what we found. So those people, we videoed them, and they showed this anxious facial expression, and then we showed that facial expression to other people, and asked them to try and match the faces back to the scenarios. And lo and behold, they matched that eye-darting, Homer Simpson anxious face back to the uncertain sort of risk-assessing, unclear type threat scenarios. That was good, I just published it. And then a guy in Brazil, he saw this, a guy called Vinicius, and he saw this, and he was like, I'm not really convinced, because this was just done in British people, and they were just like ethnically British, all of them. So he was like, oh, I don't know about this. So Brazil is a multicultural melting pot, so they've got a huge number of people from different backgrounds. So he got actors, professional actors who were, I think, American Indian, Oriental, white, and black. I think 4 categories. And he got them to again, do their facial expressions. And sure enough, they did the same ones, and then observers actually matched those to the same facial expression. So he showed that the facial expression for anxiety is robust across cultures. So that's more likely to be a real effect, I would have thought. But then I was the one who discovered it in the first place, so I wouldn't think that. So change one variable. If you're only changing one variable and you get a change, that's a sign that you're onto something. If you keep changing different variables, or you change 2 variables or 3 variables at a time, it just doesn't work out. Dose response, if you give more of something and something more happens, it's again likely to be a real effect. Start small, work up gradually. If you can get a sort of hint from a small study and then you gradually build on that and you end up with a research program, it's likely to be a real effect. So these are all just general common sense things, right? You could apply these to not just target shooting, but I don't know, fine tuning a racing car engine or something. If you're building a racing car, Formula 1 engine for Monaco Grand Prix, you want a robust engine that's not just going to blow up. So you're going to try and sort of break that engine in your practice. Because if it comes through that, if it survives that crash testing, once you get to the race, it's going to be worthwhile using. Tip 5, obvious, unspectacular science tends to be robust science. So avoid chasing trendy, sensational, or politically correct findings. The sort of flash in the pan stuff about, I don't know, unconscious bias, stereotype threat, this kind of stuff that catches a lot of headlines. But it's kind of like not necessarily that obvious to the man in the street. Stuff that's obvious to the man in the street tends to be replicable. Like if you went out into the general public and you said, do you know what an anxious facial expression is? And they'd go, yeah, that's when someone's looking shifty, like a shoplifter. You know, like somebody in a shop who's sort of doing this. They might be a shoplifter. If you were a store detective, you could probably recognize that, even though you've never had a psychology degree. Yet when you look at the psychological literature, the anxious facial expression wasn't there. The Paul Ekman faces are fear, surprise, happiness, anger, and so forth. So you can do yourself a massive favor. If you want to get tenure, just study stuff that's obvious. Like, it's obvious that some people are smarter than others. You know, again, the man in the street, if you speak to just an ordinary business person out there who's never had any psychology qualifications, when they're hiring people, they're obviously aware that there's differences in IQ and in intelligence, and that those differences matter. And this is not just since the advent of sort of Mensa. If you go back to historical literature, there's common discussions about individual differences in intelligence. So lo and behold, when you actually test it, IQ scores turn out to be the best psychological predictor of life outcomes. You live longer, you earn more, you have a better life generally. Likewise, it's obvious that some people are more conscientious than others. And lo and behold, conscientiousness is the second best predictor of life outcomes after life IQ, psychological predictor of life outcomes. And this probably seems obvious to many people, but to the sort of like pointy-headed ivory tower academics, they miss this stuff. Like when my book was drafted, the main publisher was Macmillan. They were interested in it, but they were kind of faffing around. So I just sent it out to other publishers just for a laugh. And I think it went to Routledge, and they sent it out for peer review. And one of the guys refused to peer review it. He was a sociology professor because he said personality is a capitalist construct. This is a professor. This is someone who's supposedly intelligent. And so I used to, when I was doing book launches, I would start off by just saying, let's do a thought experiment. Okay, let's imagine you've got a bank loan of £10 million to set up your dream business. You know, you've had an ambition to be a business person for many years. You've got 10 million quid. You need to hire 100 people, right? You need to hire 100 people for your job, for your new business. Raise your hand if you want to hire unreliable and uncooperative people. Nobody raises their hand. Of course, they know exactly that if you have unreliable and uncooperative people, and you're trying to run an engineering company, you know, most of the time they don't turn up to work, and then on the other occasion that they do, they're just causing fights with customers and things like this. So the average person without a PhD who's not a professor is way more clued up on this kind of stuff than we are in many cases. So that's probably why people go off down these blind alleys. I think, wasn't there something in the news just today or yesterday about the 5-HTTL?
Yeah.
That's turned out to be bogus, and there's got something like 8,500 citations for the one papers.
And the week before was oxytocin.
Yeah, exactly. So these are things that, you know, you would have avoided that if you just stuck to this kind of thing. Stick to the obvious, because we're a long way off cracking the obvious. IQ is a highly important trait, right? But we still don't know, you know, where in the brain is IQ. You know, is there an IQ lobe? How does it work? What makes people smarter? It's still, there's massive questions there. So that's my take, and so perhaps it's a sign of being unimaginative, because I'm not a very imaginative person. So I just stick to obvious stuff, and you know, it sometimes works. Okay, tip 6. I don't want to wrap it on too long. Master your professional skills. Understand experimental design and pitfalls, right? Check for typos in data entry, because that's not crash testing, right? If you've gathered some data and then you don't enter it correctly into the database, you're not crash testing your idea. You're just putting in something that's different or wrong. So this kind of stuff is super important. Use repeated measures to reduce stochastic noise. So if you just have a drug study today and you want to test drug effect on anxiety, it's way better if you just test the same people under different conditions, under placebo condition, low dose, medium dose, high dose, etc., because then they become their own control. So the random noise, if you have a placebo group and a control group, you're quite likely to get some just random noise differences between them that cause problems. So just try and use the same people and test them repeatedly. Use larger samples to provide more accurate estimates of underlying probabilities, etc., etc. So that's another benefit of personality and IQ type stuff, is that you can do large samples. There's databases with thousands and thousands of people who've done personality tests, done IQ tests, which also helps. Learn that to get funding, you need to hustle. Okay? You know what hustling is? It's just sort of being opportunistic. Like, did anyone see that famous interview with Orson Welles? Have you heard of Orson Welles, the famous film director? So, supposedly directed the greatest film of all time, Citizen Kane. I've never seen it. Anyway, he said, as a film director, he spent about 5% of his time making films, and the other 95% of his time hustling to get funding to make films. And it's pretty much the same in most other fields, certainly in science. And one of the most famous examples was he was in, I think he was in Monaco or somewhere like that, or some Mediterranean, posh Mediterranean resort. And he saw Winston Churchill. This was after the war, when Churchill was retired. He saw Winston Churchill swimming in his swimming trunks. Probably wasn't a pretty sight, but so he went up to him and he said, "Excuse me, Sir Winston, I'm very sorry to bother you. I'm a film director, I'm Orson Welles, and tomorrow I'm meeting a Russian financier, very wealthy Russian millionaire, who I'm trying to persuade to give me some money for a movie. It would mean a tremendous amount to me if you happen to be present in the hotel, if you could perhaps just say hello to me, because that would really impress him, and then he'd be more likely to give me money." So Winston just sort of went, something like that, just grunted. Anyway, and so Orson thought it was game over. Anyhow, next day he was coming into the restaurant in the hotel with the Russian financier, and lo and behold, there was Churchill sitting having his dinner. And we just thought, oh, well, it's a shame I didn't really get through to him. But then Churchill stood up, came over, and went up to Orson Welles and bowed. He got the money. So, that's hustling, and that's kind of what you need to do with when you're thinking about getting funding. It's getting funding just by writing an application is often unlikely to succeed, I would say. Whereas if you get to know people and you find out what they're interested in, you can make progress in that way. Learn to read scientific papers. Things like, if you can't understand a paper in a few minutes, just spin it. When I started out, I would read a paper and I just found it incomprehensible. And I thought this was me being too stupid. And then I just gradually realized, no, most papers are really badly written. They're just really written terrible. You can't understand what they're about. The effects are not clear. So I skim something, and if I can't understand it, I just get rid of it. Practice lecturing, video record yourself. Very few people are natural speakers. I'm certainly not. So you only realize that when you video yourself. So just get a camera like that, video yourself, and watch it back and cringe. I swear I do this, which is very annoying. So I'm trying to think of and also watch videos of really gifted speakers, like David Attenborough. He's just obviously made a massive international career out of being a really great speaker. And so he has a unique kind of...
Millions of termites feasting on honey.
He's got that kind of way of talking, and then, don't copy that, but just try and sort of see how he gets across his message, and then learn from that. But most important of all, develop your science writing. So I'll just finish off by just talking more specifically about writing. So there's two main aspects. Basic writing skills. The foundation of academic writing is learning how to put words on a page that transmit your thoughts to the reader in a clear, efficient way. It's like mind reading. The reader, by looking at these squiggles on a page, they're being directly injected into the mind of the author. You need to learn how to do this, because if you cannot inform the wider world about your scientific work, it's wasted. And also how to structure writing, how to start writing, just things like this, which are all important. Has anyone read this book? Stephen King on writing? So this is the best book I've found on scientific writing. It's not even about scientific writing, it's just about his life as the first half is basically a memoir. And he started out just talking about, he was a school teacher, I think, and he would write. He had a couple of kids already, and they lived in a mobile home. He was sort of cobbling together a tiny income from writing, from being a school teacher and also writing at the same time. And his first novel, Carrie, I think the paperback rights sold for $400 grand or something, and that was in 1972 in America, where you could buy a house for $3,000. So anyhow, so it's interesting just to read his first half of the memoir. But the second half is more technical stuff. I don't know why they put this kind of blur, so I guess because it's a horror writer. It's technical stuff, and it's just literally, it's like, I don't know, if you want to be a dentist, and you have to know the technical stuff on how to do a filling. You just need to know this. It doesn't matter what you think about teeth. You have to know this technical stuff. So this is what he says. It's like a toolbox, really. His first, so I've just paraphrased these from him. This is not my invented stuff. Tip 1, read a lot, write a lot. There's no shortcuts to acquiring good writing skills. So practice reading high-quality text and writing high-quality text. Read things like Nature magazine to learn what good scientific writing looks like. Has anyone read the Nature paper about the structure of DNA? The James Watson, Francis Crick paper? It's just a 2-page thing. And it's just like, here we suggest the structure for the deoxyribonucleic acids kind of thing. It's very, very short. And that's the structure of DNA. So if they can do that, we can do it with our trivial stuff, I guess. Keep vocabulary simple. Use the first word that comes to mind if it's appropriate and colourful. Don't be too snobby about vocabulary. Learn basic grammar. So a sentence, you know what a sentence is? A sentence is a noun and verb. Rocks explode. Jane transmits. Mountains float. Plums deify. These are all sentences. Did you know that? Because I never really thought about it until he sort of explained it. So noun plus, that's all you need. Noun plus verb, that's a sentence. Use the active tense, not the passive tense. For example, write, the meeting is at 7 o'clock, not the meeting will be held at 7 o'clock. Just cut out the unnecessary stuff. Break up a thought into 2 smaller thoughts. So learn from people like Hemingway. John frowned, full stop. He stood up, full stop. That's the kind of Hemingway style of writing, and why not learn from the best? Omit needless words. especially adverbs, words that end in ly, e.g. John grasped the hammer is better than John grasped the hammer firmly. You know, well, you see this kind of stuff in Harry Potter type things, like he slammed the door viciously. You don't need to say viciously. Slamming the door is a vicious thing. They're saying more with less. And this is, again, one of Stephen King's main rules. After I read this, I went through my manuscript and I just did a find for ly. Find inside, you know, Word documents, you can do a find. And I just put ly, and I went through it, and my text was full of this rubbish. So I just deleted all of them, almost all of them, except significantly. You need that. Avoid using exclamation marks. An argument is not strengthened by an exclamation mark. It just makes you look stupid. Put the important part of the sentence at the end. For example, with the hammer, John killed Frank is not as good as John killed Frank with the hammer. Simple. We're not talking about some sort of mystical process here. It's literally a technical process like a dentist doing a filling. That's all it is. Use short paragraphs, but always more than one sentence per paragraph, except when you don't. So tip 10 is don't be obsessed with grammar. Break the rules when it works. The object of writing is to welcome the reader and tell them a story in a fluent manner, as if it is telepathy. If the rules of grammar get in the way, they can be broken, as in Churchill's famous comment. This is the sort of English up with which I will not put. You know, when someone's really awkwardly trying to obey the laws of grammar, but it just gets in the way. Don't obey the laws of grammar. Find a writing room with a closed door, get rid of distractions, TV, phone, internet, etc. Redraft your work 3 times, making it shorter. Second draft equals first draft, minus 10. Third draft equals second draft, minus 10%. To achieve this, read, write, reread, rewrite, and so on and so forth. My book started out about that thick. It was about 500 pages. Ended up about 250. And structure. So be disciplined when writing different sections. So if you read a high quality scientific paper, you'll see that it follows strict rules regarding what goes where. The more important the finding, the shorter the introduction. So, for example, let's say you found a cure for schizophrenia. The introduction of your paper would go something like this. Schizophrenia is a serious illness. Here we show a cure for schizophrenia. That tells the reader all they need to know. Get on with it, just then do the methods. So if you want to be taken seriously, write a concise introduction. I think Journal of Neuroscience, they don't let you write more than 500 words. So that's good. I mean, if possible, do fewer than 500 words. If you have to write 10 pages of an introduction, you know, because you're studying some kind of finicky aspect of, you know, working memory, some obscure theory of working memory where if you change the timing of the probes, if you can't explain it, I think Rutherford said something like, if you can't explain your research to a barman, don't bother. It should be that simple and clear that you can just go to a pub and explain it to the guy behind the bar, and he understands it. And that was Rutherford, who was a nuclear physicist. So the methods, results section are factual reporting of what was done and what was found. No interpretation or speculation to be included. That's going to discussion. Make sure the discussion does not raise issues that have not been addressed in previous sections. Otherwise it gets a bit out of hand. Plan your work. Write a brief plan. Sketches out the main points you want to cover in the various sections. Cite studies to back them. This is all just basic stuff. Back up each point. Use AK format if possible. Be neat and organised. These days, research journals are actually, they've moved over to a sort of submit your way thing. Has anyone noticed this? So you don't have to bother formatting your paper for a particular journal's finicky style, because as long as it's got this basic structure, it doesn't matter whether the references are in Harvard style or Vancouver style or IPA style or whatever. You can just submit it, and then if they decide to if it gets sent out to review and they like it, then you can reformat it for their particular house style, which I think is great. That's a massive time saver. And I just use APA format because that's kind of easy and logical. Make it easy for the reader to like you. That's the most important point, really. You're putting forward your discoveries, so when you're writing the stuff, make it easy for the reader. Try and sort of just make it like a smooth, easy process for them to understand what you're thinking. And proofread your work a lot. I'm very bad at this. I'm just a terrible proofreader. So this is really, depends on your tendency. Some people are really great. They just pick out typos and things effortlessly. If you don't, it's a lot more important to do that. Good. Thanks very much. And if you have any questions, just email me. And if you want a copy of the book to see if I really do practice what I preach, then email me and I'll send you a PDF. Thank you very much.
Does anybody have any questions?
Okay.
Yeah.
Kind of got one. There's a slightly contradictory advice in there, and towards the end, you're saying we need to hustle to get funding. We try and make ourselves as likable as possible to the reader.
Be like Orson Welles.
Yeah, but that kind of at the same time tells us we don't have to be a salesperson for our.
Getting the reader to like you is not being a salesperson. It's just making it easier for them to engage in telepathy with you. That's all. If you read Hamilton's work, he's a brilliant writer. His writing is like telepathy. It's just effortlessly clear. But being sort of very slick and verbose in your personal presentation, he didn't need it because his stuff was so good.
But we need to be pretty good salespeople, I guess, to get the funding to do the science we want to do.
I don't know. I mean, if Hamilton didn't get much funding, but he did get like a lifetime award. So even then, I'm not sure. Just do what works. But I would say because there's such a long time frame in science, by the time your salesmanship pays off, you'll be dead anyway.
I have a couple of questions. The second one I can't remember now. The first one, with you're in a fortunate position in that your research doesn't cost much to run because it's just sending out questionnaires at bottom. But for neuroscientists, there's a problem where you have to be finicky and make sure everything's all, because there's a lot of funding behind it. So when it does run, you have to be make sure that you don't want to waste money, in other words. So the wasteful kind of just stress testing something is not really amenable to neuroscience. But I don't know whether you have a response to that or just to make me feel it is, because that would be
my last study cost 700 grand. There was a pharmacological fMRI of anxiety problems. So I think the more your study costs, the more you should crash test it. Because otherwise you're going to have a very red face. If you've just done a little questionnaire study for free and you haven't crash tested it, it's just a flimsy thing. At least there's no headlines about that. But if you have got 700 grand to do a study, so what we did is we had a new anti-anxiety drug that was developed by an Australian company, Bionomics, which is a non-sedating, non-addictive drug that they're interested in. Because most anti-anxiety drugs, like benzodiazepines, are highly addictive, and they're also sedating as well. So I said to them, okay, let's crash test your wonderful new drug against the industry standard lorazepam. Because most drug companies, they're desperate to protect their little babies. They don't want any possibility that their new drug might not be as good as another drug, so they want some. So I said, the sooner you know, the better. And to their credit, the chief executive, she was very gutsy lady, and she said, yeah, let's crash test it. Let's do it. And we did, and it turned out to be more effective than the Razorpan. So in that case, it worked, it paid off. But yeah, I don't know how would you do it with CERN. If you're building a large hadron collider, you have to be pretty sure, right? So they would need some kind of extremely robust theory and a lot of preparatory work before you build a large hadron collider. I think that's how they do it, I guess. I think that was actually what we touched on in the last talk.
And the other questions I have, I was recently told that, so we're sort of worth our weight in salt in terms of how much papers we can publish a year, the more the better. And I was told that 3 papers a year would be almost minimum, which was scary for me. But I don't know whether that's the kind of industry standard across the board. I mean, what would you recommend to your postdocs say?
Well, the PDR, I've just actually been looking at the PDR form, it's changed. So the performance development review from last year, it just said give your top 5 papers since 2014. But the form this year says give us your top 5 papers since last PDR, which is just a year. So I would assume that's...
Marion.
Different PDR than we do. We are research staff in UK.
Yeah, I'm an academic. I'm on
So the
the...
standards are not the same.
Okay.
They don't want to put any pressure on research staff in terms of numbers of papers. So the PDR will not have any implications for that for research staff. It's not for...
Yeah, it's just for...
So what is it for us?
There is no numbers because King's doesn't want to put in numbers. For example, if you're in psychology, in genetics, or if you are in the dental institute or whatever, dentistry institute, you cannot publish at the same rate, so they don't want to put too much pressure on young researchers because you might not have the same access to production. Whereas a PI who has several postdocs and several PhD students and masters can definitely produce more than we do. So King's decided to not put in numbers for us.
Yeah, I suppose that's formally sort of the agreement, but there's a kind of a tacit sort of understanding that you need to publish papers. I don't know, I'm just petrified at the idea of having to churn out a paper every 4 months.
This is an ongoing tension. So if we take Hamilton, for example, so he was, I think he was at Imperial in the 70s. I think he joined Imperial in early 60s. Back then there was a shortage of people with PhD, so he was like, I think he was the only candidate for his job. And he was taken on as a lecturer in the early 60s, and he kept being passed over. So he had like 4 kids, or something. I think 4 kids by this stage. And he kept being passed over, and he was passed over because he, not so much publications, but he didn't go to committee meetings and things. He didn't supervise students, and he got very low lecture approval ratings. So they decided that he wasn't suitable for promotion. So he, by the late 70s, he was still on the same pay grade that he'd started on as a junior. So he left and went to work in a library in America. He went to Ann Arbor, and he became I think he just worked in the library at the Natural History Museum in Ann Arbor, something like this. So this is something that is an ongoing thing. It has been. How do you measure what is good?
And my final question is, it seems so with open science or reproducible science, whatever, the movement, it's got huge fans at the lower junior level, but not so many fans at the senior level, because they want to protect their brand, and there's probably a mountain of null effects underneath their pristine presented significant findings, and labs have been built on these sort of supposed robust effects.
5-HTT type stuff.
Yeah, so there's a real tension between the sort of the conscience of early career researchers who are in this difficult position where their career is quite vulnerable and they have to toe the line, but they also want to do good science, rigorous science. And I don't know whether you've got any sort of experience or, I mean, so Ben Goldacre, for example, he said that it's not the onus of the early career researchers that should be putting their neck on the line, which I kind of sympathise with. But it's how do you sort of sleep at night knowing that you're potentially massaging or cherry picking your data to the satisfaction of your PI to save your arse kind of thing. That's not a very neat question. I guess it's just you have to do what your PI says, and that very often means you have to perform questionable research practices.
Yeah, I think it depends on the individual PI really. If you've got a good lab, then they welcome challenges. I understand in Germany, for example, that's not the case. So it's a much more authoritarian approach. But certainly the really good PIs I know, they're quite happy to take on board things that go against their life's work. It's that sort of integrity thing, I guess. But there's no one answer. So many people have forged brilliant careers by ticking all the boxes, being the kind of shiny, polished, professional, fellowship type person. Other people have forged careers like Hamilton through not being a good salesman. He basically languished in Ann Arbor for a while, and then he ran into kind of political correctness there because he complimented a junior researcher on her maths skills. He had a very talented young researcher, but he said she has exceptional math skills for a woman, which was just even back then was terrible. And so in the end, he got disenchanted there, and then I think the Royal Society awarded him a lifetime professorship, and he came to Oxford. So in the end, he succeeded, but it was a very different road to the more corporate people. So there's no perfect answer.
Is that Hamilton of the sociobiologist?
Yeah, Bill Hamilton. Yeah, and he won the Crawford and Kyoto prizes. So they're like the biological versions of the Nobel, worth hundreds of thousands of pounds. And about a month before, his wife had just left him because he didn't have enough money. And then he got awarded the Kyoto and Crawford prize shortly afterwards. So he did very well financially. But his route, his pathway was extremely unconventional. So it's a question of just looking at yourself and finding a path that works for you, as in so many other areas of life.
Any other questions? Okay, well thank you Adam.
So thanks for having me, and if you have any follow-ups, just feel free to email me.
Yeah, thank you.